when the terrible news broke. And one of the persons who lost their lives in that was Mr. Vijay Salaskar, and he was my sub-inspector when I was Deputy Commissioner of Police in Mumbai. And I remember that we had many, many years of excellent, police work together and very interesting, issues. And if I can tell your viewers a little bit about him, he was an ideal police officer. He was loyal, he was hardworking, very courageous, and he had an incredible sense of, criminal intelligence. And once he decided that he's going to go after a criminal, that was it. I know his brave family and the times which they suffered. But I think that it would be wrong to say that Vijay Salaskar is not amongst us today, because I think he has certainly been reborn in India with the great, courage which the man had. And, he will always, continue to inspire us. And for all the people who lost their lives, I just want to say one thing, that India is, internal, and India is invincible. And that this terrible event in our history will only cause us to renew our determination and look forward to the future with great courage and absolute confidence. That's what it is.
Thank you very much for paying tribute to police officer Vijay Salaskar. I know about his name because I witnessed everything live while in India, Mumbai at that time. So having said that, we will revert to this topic a little later. But today our subject matter is growing geopolitical influences of India. And recently, India has been put as a president of chairmanship of G20. These international institutions are important in their own ways. What is important here also to figure out, what does it actually mean to be the G20 in the little bit of a role of India in gaining the presidency of G20? What does it mean?
Right. Yes. So thank you. That's a very important question. And India, assumes the presidency for 1 year starting from December 1st. And it's both a great challenge and an opportunity. Why? Because the numbers involved are quite significant. The G20 countries themselves, they account for 80% of the world's GDP, 75% of the world's trade, and 60% of the world's population. Now, internally also, things can be quite tricky because the members of the G20 are divided amongst themselves on the question of Ukraine, as you know, with the European Union and the US on one side and Russia on the other. And in fact, international politics, if I can put it that way, is essentially an interaction between the heavyweights, in this forum. In addition to that, let us not forget the geopolitical, the atmosphere which it exists, which is quite negative. There are growing tensions. There is a slowing economy, increasing poverty in 70 countries. And also, obviously, there are the issues of the reform of the IMF and the World Bank. So in all these respects, it is a big challenge for India attaining this presidency, and one should not expect miracles. But certainly, we have to look at the challenges, as they are, and they are certainly daunting.
See, the challenges will always remain daunting. You have been with the United Nations for many years. These many multilateral institutions provoke a sense of lethargy in people, as if nothing happens there.
Right.
I mean, you are a witness to the scene, and people are also talking about the inefficiency and inefficacy of the United Nations. So I do not want to, focus on the United Nations, but tell us more about G20 as to how does it work?
Right.
How will the trade and the other issues be resolved? And how does the G20 mechanism work within the ambit of, within the framework of United Nations, outside? How does it bring about a commonality of purpose, given the fact that both in terms of population, trade, global importance, G20 is big?
Correct.
How does it actually operate to make this whole thing efficient and effective?
Yes, you see, the G20, the presidency of the G20 does not carry any formal authority. But at the same time, being having its presidency obviously gives it certain clout. But in terms of the nuts and bolts, here's what happens in G20. There are inside what are called two tracks. The first track is of the finance ministers, finance track, in which you have the finance ministers of various countries and the heads of the central bank, who meet and obviously discuss economic issues. That is track one. Track two is a very interestingly named Sherpa track, which consists of the personal emissaries of the heads of state. In this case, we have Mr. Amitabh Kant, who was the CEO of Niti Aayog for 6 years. And in addition to these two tracks, you have something called 10 engagement groups. Now, these consist of, for instance, civil society, parliamentarians, researchers, women, youth, labor, and researchers. Now, throughout the course of the year, for 1 year, about 200 meetings will be held all over India, and the Sherpas will be responsible for coordinating and negotiating, and finally, when to decide what agenda items are going to be in the final meeting, and consequently, that is what happens, throughout the year. So essentially, it's on the two tracks where the internal mechanisms of the G20 meet, and that's where the nuts and bolts are, Vibhuti.
That's good to know, because a lot of time people are confused about the Sherpas, the finance ministers, and
Mhm.
coordination about the whole thing. But I was very interestingly drawn
Right,
towards what Prime Minister had said, and I'm quoting him here. Uh, in the context of G20, he invited G20 to participate
right,
in this unique celebration in India, the
right,
mother of democracy.
right.
I find his reference to India being the mother of democracy very interesting and very
Hmm.
relevant.
Hmm.
What do you see the significance in this?
Yes, it's very interesting that you picked up on this, and so did I. I think it is an unmistakable but subtle message to the world that we are culturally a democratic nation, and that our cultural roots go very deep into our ancient history, even though the technical apparatus of the Indian democracy might be borrowed from the West. And being a student of history, I can tell you that the Prime Minister was right. For instance, if you read the Pali Canon, there are many references to self governing communities, and there is a specific vocabulary also for the various groups that govern themselves. Of course, this continued along with the monarchical tradition, but at the same time, this is what I think the Prime Minister was trying to refer to. At a deeper level, I think that what the Prime Minister was trying to do is to continue his efforts at what is called the decolonization of the Indian mind. And you see it in many cases, for instance, the installation of the statue of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in India Gate, the new design of the Indian Navy, which borrows elements from the naval design of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, because he had a navy, his use of Hindi in the international arena, and of course, the adoption of the International Day of Yoga. So essentially, what he's trying to say to Western democracies is that you think you are the ones who invented democracy, but actually, the roots of cultural democracy in India go back much further. And that is why he is occupying the high ground, not only internally, but also externally, to make India a nation with a higher profile in the world and to exhibit its ancient roots, which are linked indelibly to the present.
That's very true. And this also then, it is important to for us Indians in the United States, Indian Americans here, Indians in India, bear in mind that when he is laying the claim to its democracy based on history and our traditions,
Right.
has the world or India itself done a study or studies on what is the basis of success for Indian democracy in the worworld?
That's
Call
a
it
very
chaos or whatever it is, but that's very critical. The West claims it's that what do you call it is the designer of democracy as a tool of governance.
right.
But that tool of governance existed in India in our principles. So that claim to mother of democracy is very valid, but there doesn't seem to be any credit given to India for having brought that concept to the world.
It's very interesting that you should raise this question, Vibhuti. And I remember in 2001, I was drawn to a book called The Success of Indian Democracy. Now, this was published by Princeton University by a very distinguished professor called Professor Atul Kohli. And, he was the editor of the book. And there were many people who wrote various chapters of the book, including distinguished Indian authors and professors and Western authors. Now, the question which they were trying to address was something which puzzled them. And that is, why has democracy taken root in India, which seems to be an outlier? How is it that India, with its poverty, backwardness, illiteracy, diversity, has managed to survive as a democracy for so long? That was the question. And the answer they came up with was a technically correct answer. They said a delicate balance has been struck between the forces of centralization and of decentralization, one, and that the interests of the rich had been preserved without disregarding those who were at the periphery. And when I read this, I said, fair enough. In terms of the constitutional machinery and the design of India, that answer may very well be a convincing answer. But I was left unsatisfied. And here's a question which I asked myself. I said, why have they not investigated? What does the Hindu ethos have to do with the success of Indian democracy? Now, they could have asked that question and answered it anyway. They could have said it's not connected, or it is somewhat connected, or it is very much connected. I don't know, because they never asked that question. Now, obviously, the question is, was my question a valid one? And I think it was, because if you have a look at Western academia, there's so much of literature you will find on, for instance, what is the link between the Protestant ethic and the success of capitalism? There have also been studies on the alleged incompatibility of Islam with democracy. So therefore, I think that these learned professors were insufficiently curious, and I believe that this question remains one which is worthy of academic and commonsensical interpretation and also analysis. That is what I think about this, Vibhuti.
Thank you very much. But I will come back to the second element of that. You talked about poverty, diversity, and varieties of things that India is inflicted by, or it is self-imposed, what do you call, restrictions that India imposes on itself. But when I was a student of economics in Gokhale Institute in Pune, there was a phrase that was very common, the Hindu rate of growth. That always bothered me because it associated the rate of growth to Hindu philosophy. Whereas Hindu philosophy was always parakram driven, if I may say so. It was always driven by parakram, performance. And, Indian history is full of these nuances and reality everywhere. That's why I attribute that statement which Prime Minister made, that our history post-independence is a history of Gulami, whereas India's bravery has been overlooked. Coming to that element, what do you think was the impact of insertion of socialism, the word socialism and secularism in the Indian constitution during emergency? That actually stifled the entire growth story. And it is not Hindu rate of growth, but the 3.5% was the socialist rate of growth. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, well, the thing is that if you have a look at, excuse me, Indians all over the world, for instance, Africa, when you go out there, they're a very enterprising people. They go, they buy, sell, trade, and consequently, there's nothing socialist about them. They actively pursue the accumulation of wealth, and that's how it should be. Now, when they put socialism inside, that was actually in economic and political terms, it was a disaster because it really stifled the creative energies of our wonderful entrepreneurs within India. And it was only in 1991 when they were started getting dismantled because we had the shock after when Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao was the prime minister, and when India was facing a very difficult, situation. So there was a liberalization which turned the country around. But in terms of socialism, you know, the the question is what might have been. That's what I think about. I mean, what could India have been if it were not for the insertion of socialism? In terms of secularism, again, India has never discriminated against any religion. And if you look at the movement of the Indian independence movement, it was always an inclusive movement. So that word, was redundant in a cultural sense, but now it is a part of the constitution. And there are many definitions of secularism. But both these words, I think, have had a problematic aspect to it, which I think it is time that we acknowledge.
I think I totally agree with you, but it also brings about another subject matter on this. The growing influence of India in the geopolitical scenario. I'm a witness to that because I was one of the first few good men who brought India's liberalization story to America and the rest of the world, along
Right.
with many others. The issue here is very important. How does India today, given the fact that politically and every other sense of the term, India is being branded for whatever it is not? How will this influence India's role in the entire geopolitical since Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014? People used to comment that he's more of an NRI prime minister than he's a domestic prime minister. He keeps traveling all the time. Explain to our viewers, how does Prime Minister Modi how did he bring about this entire new concept of internationalization of Indian ethos, the Hindu ethos, and getting branded as some kind of an evil that is Hindutva? How will that shape up in the G20 context as we are stepping up?
Well, in terms of the prime minister, linking India's past to the present, uh, the first thing which I want to say is that the value of India's past and the absolute practicality and the benefit of India's past is used by the world everywhere. For instance, if you have a look at yoga, well, it has sprung from the genius of the Indian mind, and it was practiced because it was efficacious, because people found it relevant to their lives, and because people knew, quote unquote, it worked. Now, when he is linking the past to the present, he is trying to instill a sense of pride amongst the Indians, which I think is very good. For instance, if you're working for a company, the company code asks you be proud of your company. If you're working for a school, they say, well, my school is the best. So consequently, in terms of interpersonal relations, or in terms of psychology, people are told you have to have confidence in yourself. You have to look at your past and reach out confidently into the future and what you can do. Now, with this simple commonsensical concept, he is telling us that our past does not mean that our past was only for the past. There are elements in that which are relevant today. And the fact is that if you take many elements of India's past and winnow them through the scientific methods, you will find that there is plenty for us to learn from our own heritage and plenty for the world to learn from our own heritage. This does not mean being chauvinistic. This does not mean having a false sense of pride. It simply means having a sense of curiosity for your past and seeing what is relevant today and using it. Now, when he has done that, I suppose there are powerful forces who don't want this to happen. But the way forward is not to give it up. The way forward is to go ahead, because what we have in our culture is very precious and it is applicable today, and its influence will only spread because they can be empirically verified as relevant to the world today, Vibhuti. That is what I would think.
That's very well said. I wanted to switch over to the geopolitical dimensions of India US relationships with reference to the midterm elections that have happened.
Right.
And also wanted to request the viewers, my first, homework in this regard. Please subscribe, like, and press the bell icon for the Jaipur Dialogue USA, including Jaipur Dialogues. And as we expand our education, because whatever Rahulji was alluding to, that if we have to be proud of our heritage, and because of his inherent links with the present, the solution lies in Sanatan practices. So education becomes the key part. How do you see, what lessons do we draw from the India-US relationship? Because we have so many commonalities of purpose, commonalities in the way we are, that it is very critical for India-US to be friends. Whereas
Yes.
more often than not, we have put varieties of words, strategic partners, natural allies, but that relationship has not fructified to its fullest extent. So in juxtaposition of the midterm election, when Republican Party has gained the House, they have won significant seats in New York, in Long Island. 4 seats were won by congressional, our party candidates. And even from California, there were significant wins that Republican Party had. How do you see that shaping up, considering the economic importance of India now being recognized in the US in real sense?
Well, if you look at both India and America, obviously both are democracies and both are vibrant democracies. Uh, there has been a very close, people to people exchange. I'll say that lots of, educated Indians have been coming over in the US at a time when, economic opportunities were not that existing in India. And they have had over the years a very benign influence, uh, you know, uh, on America in terms of the contribution, which is being, increasingly recognized. On the other hand, if you have a look at American thinkers, many American thinkers have been influenced by the Vedic philosophy. And consequently, the other day I was, for instance, reading Vivekananda, and he wrote a poem on July the 4th, their Independence Day. So the thought coming out of ancient India has found a very welcoming home in the United States, amongst really the intelligentsia. Now, that is at the people to people and the philosophical levels. Now, when it comes to the political and economic levels, obviously it can be a different scenario because both of them are democracies, and some of them can have times when the political parties may have, see the other country not exactly the same as when the other party was in power. But right now, if you see, for instance, what came out of the G20, there was a formal recognition by the White House of the positive role which Mr. Modi had played in the final declaration of the Bali summit. And subsequent to that, I believe there was a dinner in the house of the Indian ambassador to the US, in which Mr. Jonathan Fina, who was representing, President Biden, said that he looked to Mr. Modi as one of the leaders who's going to take the agenda forward. So therefore, we can see certainly a broadening of the economic interests. Recently, Janet Yellen was in India, and she sent a clear message that they have to diversify where they have to invest. We've seen a lot of increasing investment and interest, for instance, in iPhone manufacture in India. So consequently, I think it's going to be a growing partnership, and obstacles can remain, obstacles will remain, because both countries will see the relationship through the lens of their national interest, and that's how it should be. So we have a leader who is committed to having a greater imprint and a scope of India on the international stage, and that is certainly being acknowledged. And now that it has reached, and now it has had the presidency of the G20, I at least personally expect things to go in the same positive direction, whether they are the same speed or not, but certainly on the trajectory, notwithstanding that there might be bumps along the way.
Bumps along the way, and that is one of the banes of democracy, because as the famous saying goes, the criminals and antisocial elements thrive on the compassion of the society and the rule of law. You have been in the police, you have seen how the domestic affairs impact international relationships. How do you see the Republicans, having captured the power, proceed ahead with investigations of Mr. Biden now, just as as the Democratic Party was hell bent on destroying Mr. Trump
Right.
by involving him in so many investigations.
Mm-hmm.
And we now know that
Right.
it is not confidence inspiring. Actually, it actually hurts the confidence of people
Right.
that 51 intelligence officers of FBI had certified that the entire Hunter computer thing
Mm-hmm.
was Russian inspired or Russian manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the same media, the Washington Post, New York Times, CBS, NBC, everybody says that it was not Russia, it was true,
Mm-hmm.
as they said. Does that inspire confidence in the process of the system, which
Right.
are the FBI is supposed to uphold the dignity of the
Mm-hmm.
investigations, the impartiality? Today we are seeing the politicization of FBI.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think if you were the advisor to Republican Party in the House, Mr. McCarthy? How must this confidence be restored? That's the key question. Pursuing investigations in Joe Biden and his son is one part of the story. The truth must come out.
Mm-hmm.
Satyameva Jayate, as we say in our philosophy, the
Right.
truth must triumph. How do you
Right.
see that role playing out, considering the fact that you have extensive background of police and investigations itself?
Right. So in this very important question, there's no easy answer, but I think I'll try to address it at two levels. The first is obviously the context that these allegations by one party are being made, and both parties are making allegations against each other. Now, because it is a political context, it is going to be seen with a degree of distrust from the other side, and that is inevitable. And that is how it is supposed to pan out in a democratic system where you have an adversarial system of parties. But the way I look at it as an oversight professional is slightly different. And that is, let's keep aside the politics for a moment and ask a fundamental philosophical question. That is, what is the basis of this country? Here you have the US, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. There is agreement that there is the rule of law, which simply means that no person or institution is above the law. And accountability means that you are responsible, you have to answer for your actions. And if you do not do as you're supposed to, then you will have to face consequences. Now, in this case, serious allegations have been made against the FBI, by the Republicans, and the allegations against Mr. Hunter Biden are a matter of public record. So, if one argues that a restoration in the instruments of investigation, the FBI, and if you have to argue that the rule of law must be upheld, in which no person is above the law, then I would say that these investigations have to be done in a fair, impartial, and thorough manner, keeping in mind the fundamental principle that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. So, therefore, from the point of view of the political parties, they may have one particular point of view and they may wish for a certain outcome. But from the point of view of an ordinary citizen who is interested in the integrity of the institutions of this country, I would say that fair, just, impartial investigations are absolutely necessary. What do you think about that, Vibhuti? That's what I think.
So the thing is like this: fair, just, and impartial inquiry. Does it really happen? Because what is important is the rule of law, and you are not guilty until proven. Evidence is key, correct?
Right.
However, let's take one particular example of that. Salman Rushdie, we know now. We witnessed the scene. Hundreds of people were, witnesses to the fact that a man climbed onto the stage, stabbed him as many times, virtually, he could have died in that attack. But in the rule of law, he plays not guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And the legal system now provides him support to contest the entire case, because there will
Right.
be people fighting the case, just like in India it happens. Muhammad Qasab was part of a 10 young men from Pakistan who did 2611, but trial took 2.5, 3 years. The man who attacked Salman Rushdie pleads not guilty. I was just wondering, as a layman, the question was not about guilty. Did you do it? And there are hundreds of people watching that entire tragic event unfold.
Right.
Where does the rule of law, as a police officer, you find that that is a wrong question? Who does the rule of law benefit? And that's where the common man is currently concerned about. That the rule of law is all about what kind of a good quality lawyer you are able to handle or
Right.
hire. That saps the confidence of people in the rule of law.
Mhm.
Because you and I, as ordinary people, are not the beneficiaries of rule of law. The
Mhm.
criminals are. I mean, this is a classic example. Salman Rushdie's attacker is a classic example. The
Mhm.
question is not whether you plead guilty or not. Did you
Right.
do it? Was the right question perhaps to ask? Your thoughts on that?
Yes. Now, that is, of course, a very difficult question. And in terms of what the law says, every person is innocent until proven guilty, and even the attacker of Salman Rushdie is. And you would hardly expect him to plead guilty. That happens in very in specific circumstances. But now the question is, how long is the trial going to take? Who is going to give the evidence? What is going to be the sentencing? And what is going to be the reaction of the society to these sentences? So that is an entirely different question, and I think it's a valid point for discussion and thought amongst citizens to see how long does the criminal process take, and is it something which has been delayed to such an interminable extent that virtually any sense of justice to the people who have been harmed has been lost. Now, these are valid questions. There have been many people who have undoubtedly committed the most serious crimes, who are on death row and for many years have been waiting there. And we know that their sentences will not be carried out because of the lengthy system of appeals and further appeals. That is something which only a society can decide for itself. How long do we want the rule of law to be? Does it become excessive? What kind of shortcuts do we want in that? Or shall I say, what kind of abbreviation do we want in that, so that society also gets a sense of justice? Because remember that it is not only the rights of the criminal who we are talking about. There is an injured party. Mr. Salman Rushdie, an outstanding world-class intellectual, has apparently lost one eye and the use of his hand. Now, really, our heart should go out to him. But he is now removed from the public sphere, probably is going to live in fear throughout the rest of his life, which is so unfortunate given his tremendous literary output. And this man is going to be tried for many years. So it's a valid question. I don't have a simple answer for that. All I'm saying is that the issues which you raised inevitably lead to further questions which require action by the community, by the citizens, and by the politicians, together. That's what I can say, from the sidelines of Vibhuti.
Yeah, you are totally right. Because what happens is that normal citizens expect law to work. There is another example of that. We know that it's a saga in its own way. Nupur Sharma of BJP, she quoted elements from the text of Islam, and she is now, there is a fatwa on her. She is now sitting somewhere incognito and unable to come in the public light, whereas the man who is supposed to be the fact checker, a guy called Zubair, walks free because he doesn't have any fatwa or a threat from anyone from the other citizenship. But Nupur Sharma lives a threat like that.
Mm-hmm.
These are instances or incidents, or these are the behavior of the people that undermines the faith that rules our way of life. How does one address that? What must people do? So it's when you say that people have to decide, people are represented by politicians in a democratic setup.
Right.
What must the politicians do to restore the confidence in the process, which is key to the success of our policies?
The answer to this question is both very simple and straightforward, and at the same time very difficult. And I'll tell you why. The rule of law is actually a very simple and straightforward concept. That is, nobody is above the law. And consequently, if you break the law, you're going to face the consequences. Now, in this case, uh, you have got highly differential outcomes, depending upon the two personalities. And the answer to that lies in an impartial, implementation of the law. Now, why does that not happen? And we obviously go on to another linked question of police reform, which is linked to politicization, which is linked to cultural elements, which are cultural and religious elements, which are playing out certainly in this case. And consequently, you go from a very specific problem to suddenly a very big problem. Now, you will have to solve the problem in each case, but two things are necessary. One is a pressure by citizens that the rules and laws should be applied equally without fear or favor. And number two, making sure that the courts or our court system are um, active enough or responsive enough to see that punishments and consequences are meted out in a reasonable amount of time. Otherwise, justice delayed is justice denied. Now, the other aspect, of course, that is the political aspect of that, which is a whole different ball game, because the calculations are different. The calculation is that of electoral gain. What do I gain if I say this? What don't I gain if I don't say this? It's a very, very murky situation. But the answer is very simple. We have to strengthen our institutions. We have to strengthen the rule of law. We have to demand that no matter what a person does, that person is subjected to the law. And again, it's a simple concept, but very difficult to implement.
To what extent you have been in the police, you have been very active in this. How do you see police as the instrument of the arm of the government to enforce law? How is their capability and effectiveness dented by political considerations? And I will straightaway attribute, as living in America, does FBI or will FBI ever recover its impartial role, considering what we have seen play out in this country?
In terms of the FBI, if you have a look at this, they have published, the Republicans have actually published a report, and they have made very serious allegations, against the FBI, and that is of politicization, of targeting conservatives, of getting rid of FBI officials who do not subscribe to the woke ideology, and they said essentially, this is happening from based out of the Washington field office. Now, these are allegations, and I might say that they have sent a letter, to various administration officials, including the head of the FBI, that they would like to have transcribed interviews, and consequently, it is the transparency which is going to matter. And individuals and institutions matter, and they have pride in their reputation. And I would think that the FBI, if you go to its website, it says that the US Congress exercises oversight over them. So consequently, the US Congress exercising oversight over them is absolutely nothing new. It is required by law. Now, it is possible that the FBI thinks that we are doing something which is correct, but the perception outside is completely different. Again, at the same time, what we need to have is a fair and impartial investigation, as has been promised. Whether it will happen or not is a different thing. But if we are concerned about the integrity of institutions, then certainly this is a track which is worth probing, and certainly the FBI is not above the rule of law.
Nobody is above the rule of law. But as you rightly said, that political considerations play a big role in every decision, whether the House controlled by Republicans or Democrats.
Yes.
It matters. So
Right.
my guy does the violence, it is expression of freedom of speech and expression.
Right.
Your guy does it, you are a fanatic.
Right.
That's the wordplay that gets into the problem, that creates a problem going forward.
Yes.
So my question again here with you is that, to what extent, in your experience of your work life, did you encounter a scenario where the political decisions impact investigations? Because as human beings, we have
Yeah,
our failings,
yeah.
and that will continue. So, how does one inspire the confidence that you are impartial and I am impartial and the rest of the world is not?
The linkage between those who exercise power and those who are in the police department can be very close. And it is a sign of, shall I say, not a very, it is a concerning sign when the people in power use the police for, blatantly political purposes. And, we see this in many countries, and I don't want to name any countries, but that is precisely why you have mechanisms. For instance, police officers are supposed to enforce the law without fear of favor, and it is a part of the American Constitution and also of the rule of law that it is not supposed to be influenced by politics. But is it? Well, the thing is that many people have the impression that it is. Now, for instance, again, going back to the question of the report which has been issued by the Republicans, it's called FBI Whistleblowers, what their disclosures indicate about the politicization of FBI and the Justice Department, right? Now, this is a 1,050-page report. I've read the entire thing. There are about 50 pages of substantive narrative text, and the appendices in these are basically letters asking for the appearance of people. Now, what is going to happen about this? I don't know. It is entirely, unknown. An allegation can be made. Well, this is a political investigation, and consequently, there's nothing wrong with the FBI. But me sitting outside cannot pronounce one way or the other. But the influence and the attempt which the people in power have to exercise over the police, which is the distillation of the right of the state to use violence, is seen in many societies, and the closer it gets linked, the more the society is in trouble.
That brings to the two words that you used earlier on, the integrity of the system and the impartiality of the law, and the public image, the perception. So the geopolitical influence of India, United States, depends on the actions that they take
Right.
and what people see and how it gets reported. So journalism also has an important element to ask tough questions, inconvenient truths, and for which you and I can be targeted for making that statement. But our job is to ask an inconvenient question. Otherwise, we will never get to the truth, and the
Right.
trust will never get established, and transparency will never be visible.
Right.
Share with us your thought on the recent two incidents. One is how United States left Afghanistan, leaving behind billions of dollars worth of arms and weapons,
Right.
and U.S. conduct in Ukraine,
Right.
and how Prime Minister of India has been dealing with the entire Ukraine issue.
Right.
United States and India are at different poles with
Right.
reference to Ukraine,
Right.
but India did succeed. And the entire world acknowledged the wording of the resolution passed by G20 on Ukraine. How do you see that play out in the real world?
Yes, so let me first take the example of Afghanistan and the weapons that were left behind. And I was doing research in the subject, and I said, well, there's been a lot of weapons left behind. What has been actually established about the facts? And I came across this office, which is called the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Now, this is an office which has been established by the US Congress, and it carries out objective, audits, inspections, and evaluations, exactly like in the office which I was working when I was in the United Nations. And what it does is it sends reports to the Congress so that it can take better funding decisions. And the idea behind this office is simple. That is a transparency to the American people about the funds spent in Afghanistan reconstruction. Now, in November this year, there was a report which was published by them, and which responded to a request from the US Congress, which wanted to find out what happened to the funds and the defense equipment which we left behind when the US retreated. That was the question which the US Congress had entrusted to this independent auditing body called SIGAR, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Well, they send their report. It's absolutely fresh, hot off the printing press, if I can call it. And here is what they said, that $7.1 billion worth of defense equipment has been left behind. Now, in this case, of course, they can be sophisticated equipment like helicopters, etc., which might not be workable after some time because they might not have the facility to maintain them. But they also left behind a large amount of small arms, and I know from my work in the United Nations that small arms are the deadliest in fueling conflicts because they stay for a long time. You can bury them for a long time. There have been stories of, AK-47 has been buried underground for 20 years. You take it out, oil it a little bit, and bang, it's, good for, firing again. So these arms have started surfacing, which have been left behind in Afghanistan in large numbers in Pakistan. There is a place called Landi Kotal, which is the westernmost part of the Durand line, which divides, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And they also said that, they left behind a lot of money, which happened because the Afghan government collapsed, and consequently, it has made its, way into the hands of the Taliban. So this is an example of, of accountability. And this is not an allegation. This is a fact because this has been established by an office established by the U.S. Congress, and these weapons are landing up in on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and one cannot rule out the possibility that they can be filtered, for further destabilization, in India. So that's the answer to question number one. Number two question, can you kindly repeat that, please, so I can answer that?
That the Prime Minister Modi and India had taken a different stand on Ukraine, for which the West chided it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So in this case, in terms of just sheer, if you look at it academically in terms of negotiation theory, if you have one person in the middle who does not declare himself with one side or the other, then he or she is going to be in a more advantageous position because both sides are going to be trying to woo him. Now, that is precisely what happened in this case. That is, the Prime Minister Modi, with his view that we are not going to side with one side or the other blindly, but at the same time, keeping into account India's strategic interests, which he knows very well, what happens in the Security Council. Not only didn't side, but also he came out with a straight and sincere and simple statement which resonated all over. That is, this is not the era of war. And that is why this assertion had a lot of legs, and it's made its way into the G20, declaration. India now has a long overdue declared policy that we are going to look after our interests first. And I cannot understand anything more commonsensical than that. For instance, a head of a family looks after the family, a head of a university looks after the university first, a head of a management institution looks after that management institution first. So why should a leader of a country not look after his country first? It's as simple as that to me. But in this case, because there is a growing relationship between India and the USA, notwithstanding the bumps, I would say that India is in a strong position because remember, let's go back to G20, and it is responsible for the agenda of the G20, and there's going to be a leader summit on the 9th and 10th of September 2023. So I expect, Indian diplomacy, it's not going to be simple, but I expect Indian diplomacy to be proactive and respected and adhering to the principles of peace without sacrificing those of self-interest.
And I totally agree with that because, as all American presidents always say, that we are doing this or that for American people or American interests. So it is in the fitness of things that Prime Minister Modi also has asserted that we are doing for Indian interests, whether it was purchasing oil from Russia.
Right.
Jaishankarji has given very emphatic response to Europeans. That is world known. Everybody knows about it. And India has a stake and India's pride in assertion of its own principles has been also respected grudgingly by the United States, that how can you not work for your own interests? But Correct. It brings me back in the last 5 minutes to a very critical question. Somewhere along the line, India gets bedeviled by the Pakistani side of the story. And look at the entire Afghanistan fiasco. Pakistan has a big role to play in it, has been responsible for it. It has taken money from America and sent American soldiers in body bags back here through Haqqani
Right.
groups and others. How does, and currently we know Pakistan is in a mess. I mean, nobody needs to know more than that. The Pakistanis are more concerned about it than we Indians are taking interest in it, that Pakistan belongs in a no man's land right now. So how do you feel that India needs to address the Pakistan imbroglio? Because Pakistan will always, always, always try to impact and hurt India adversely.
Right.
That is public secret.
Right. So that Pakistan is in a mess. You said everybody knows about it. Yes, that's true. Uh, but recently, I make it a point to try to follow, Pakistani sentiments by reading The Dawn regularly. And the kind of things and the kind of assessment which they have about their country, are fairly dispiriting. Now, what we have to look at is that we have to see what is the possible trajectory of that country given all the pressures which are weighing in that country. And there are plenty of them. For instance, it's got a huge population. People might not know that the total fertility rate of Pakistan was 6.6 children per woman in 1950, and it's come down to 3.30, which is still growing. It's a huge population. It's not a demographic dividend because the level of education is not sufficient to have, either generate employment or to provide skills to the industry. And they're thinkers. For instance, Maliha Lodhi, she was the Pakistani ambassador to the US, UK, and the UN. She recently wrote an article, "Is Pakistan Ungovernable?" There was a finance minister who recently wrote an article, and I'm reading out. His name is Ismail Miftah, and he said, quote, "From population planning to illiteracy, to extremism to budget, and trade deficits to local economy, to privatization, to growth, to income disparity, our governments have been unable to fix any issue. We can't even resolve the simple issue of moonlighting. A survey found that 40% of Pakistanis want to leave the country." To which one reader said, "Nothing good comes out of hatred, let alone policy statements or existential issues. But that is exactly what Pakistan is, in every sense, an antithesis of its arch nemesis, India. Until it comes to terms with this illogical, dogma-driven hatred, there is no hope for rational policy making." These are not my words. These are the words of a Pakistani reader. Now, what does it mean for India? I think what it means for India is that there is a question over the medium to long-term stability of this country. And we will have to watch it very carefully because developments can be, quick and sudden. In terms of what their attitude towards India is, I do not see any sign of it changing. I think there is if I can put it that way, there is a bipartisan consensus in Pakistan to continue this policy towards us. And therefore, the ball is squarely in their court for, in fact, coming around to understand that this is not an era of conflict, and that there are many more things which can be done in a positive sense if only they leave this obsession, with India behind. So we should be under no illusions as to what we are up against. This is a phenomenon called the prisoners of geography, and we are the prisoners of geography because we are neighboring countries, and to be on our guard and look at them very carefully, very critically, without any illusions, is something which we should always be doing.
The article that you pointed out and the cigar report, I would want you to send it to me. I will put it on the Jaipur Dialogue website
Yes.
for people to see that, those who are interested in understanding the nitty-gritties of the governance.
Yes.
It's important to understand. But that article by Pakistani gentleman was very profound and very deep.
Right.
And if he's right that 40% of the Pakistanis want to leave the country, that ought to scare every Pakistani.
Yes.
Where will they go? Because even globally, many countries do not want Pakistanis anymore. Even in this country, many Pakistanis want to, mention that they are Indians. All Pakistani restaurants are known as Indian restaurants.
Right.
They proudly say that. So there is a very interesting cultural clash and emotional upheaval in the minds of those people. How does India deal with that? How does an Indian deal with that? Because somewhere along the line, the theological exercise that goes on, it brings them into conflict with everyone else around.
This is a question for the ages. It's not going to get solved easily. We have to make sure that we are strong. We have to make sure that our economy is strong, because that is the basis, for you can afford, high military expenditures, be in the alert, and do all the things which good things in life, art, literature, culture. uh, these are far more enabled because of a good economy. So, number one responsibility of the Indian government should be to grow our economy, to make India a strong and prosperous nation. And in terms of the internal thought process of Pakistan, I think there's very little we can do about it. The only, I would say, sliver of hope is that there is a slew of Pakistani YouTubers who are more critical, towards the internal developments there, and possibly, better aligned to India. Uh, I see some of them regularly. There's a lady called Arzu Kazmi. She's got a nice sense of humor. So therefore, the right-thinking Pakistanis, but there is a strong incentive in their establishment to continue the policy which they have continued till now, because it has been economically very, very useful to them. And you can follow the money, and you can find out what the quote unquote, what they call the army is called, the establishment out there. How it benefits from the continuation of this anti-India policy. Very few Pakistanis are realizing that this is something which is a cul-de-sac. I don't know how many of them will change their mind. Only time will tell.
You brought about the name of Miss Arzu Kazmi, and she has been on Jaipur Dialogues many times with Sanjay Dixit ji, and she is much liked in India by Indian audiences. And Tariq Fatah is another name which springs up very easily. Know him personally. Tahir Gora is another one, who have been trying to drill a sense in the entire political turmoil that is Pakistan. But those people are branded as India agents. There is an entire military gameplay that goes on. Rational views, reasonable views are not encouraged, but it is encouraging, I might add, to see that people are now speaking up. Rahulji, it was a great pleasure to have you here today. This is your first time on Jaipur Dialogue, and I guess we will have many more shows to talk about your insights of Kennedy School of Governance. You have John Hopkins Institute Education. You are a lawyer. You are a policeman. You have been a United Nations official for a long number of years. So welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA. And hopefully we will bring you on Jaipur Dialogue as well one of these days. Viewers, thank you very much for joining us on this Saturday. Please like, subscribe, and press the bell icon for the channel. We are trying to bring a new narrative to the issues, frankly, boldly, to bring about what I prefer to call trust, truth, and transparency in full play. Thank you very much for joining us today. As I always say, Satyamev Jayate, truth must triumph.
Namaskar, Vibhuti ji, and I thank you, Jaipur Dialogues, and your viewers also. And I look forward to your taking forward this discourse of the new India. Thank you very much for efforts. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.